Hi everyone, it's Margaret Manning here. Welcome to 60 and Me. This is the place where women over 60 come to be inspired. My guest today is Jane Duncan Rogers. Jane has an organization called Before I Go Solutions, which is designed to help people design and create their end-of-life plan. Sounds like an interesting topic, and it is, and I'm so glad to have you here, Jane.
Thank you. Yeah, very good to be here.
Thank you. You know, this is a tricky one. This subject is one that people stay with us, don't go away, because, you know, it's one of those topics where you just want to kind of avoid the conversation. And I'm so happy that you, as an author, have written a book on this topic and given people guidelines for how to write this end-of-life document and experience, I guess, what we might call a good death. So what is that? And let's talk a little bit about that.
Yes, a good death. Well, usually when I think about this, and I've talked to other people about it, it kind of falls into two categories, which is what is a good death for the person who is dying, or what we would want for somebody who's dying. And that nearly always includes the word peaceful. We want them to be peaceful, which is understandable. We want a peaceful death ourselves. Often that means dying in your sleep. So it's like you know nothing about it. And of course, that feels good. That sounds good. If it's usually out of pain, we don't want to be in pain. It might even be, for some people, a good death would be sudden, so they don't know anything about it. If we think about the opposites, lingering and all that kind of stuff, I won't go into that because we don't want to look at that. That's what we don't want.
No, of course, it's hard.
Exactly. And that's all completely understandable. For those who are left behind after somebody has died, they might describe a good death, including all those things for that person, but actually it might also include the fact of the impact of what happened to them afterwards. So, for example, if the person who died was very well prepared and was able to talk about it, that they had tidied up their affairs, that there was a will and a power of attorney, and there was all the other documentation that constitutes a good end-of-life plan, then that actually means that those left behind are going to have a different experience of that person's death, or the aftermath of that person's death. So for some, that might include the what they would consider to be a good death as well. Many people I've spoken to have are concerned. They don't like the idea. They don't like the idea of dying. I mean, nobody likes that idea, let's face it, but unfortunately it is going to happen to us all. Nobody likes that idea, but also many people that I work with have had maybe a difficult experience of taking care of things after somebody has died, and they definitely don't want their children or their relatives to experience that. And that's the motivation for taking care of their end-of-life stuff. And that's then becomes something that part of something that they consider a good death.
You know, it's a really interesting conversation. You know, at the very beginning, when you were talking about what a good death is for the person who is dying, it kind of overlaps with the second part, in the sense that if you have downsized your life in all kinds of areas, you know, got rid of all the toxic people and the toxic places, and you've kind of got to the place in your life where you're happy, you know, where you're comfortable with yourself, and you've taken the time to write an end-of-life plan, a will and a power of attorney, all the things that we have talked about, then you feel better about your death. I mean, that sounds ridiculous to say that, but that's also part of a good death for me, that I know I've done those things. It's not just being peaceful or pain-free, and of course that's how I hope that that I die. But I think the other part blends with it, don't you?
Yeah, no, it's really important that, and it is part of it. And if we can bring ourselves to attend to that beforehand, actually, although it looks like you're feeling better about death, like you said, which is a lovely way to put it, actually what it means is that you can get on with living your life now much more.
True. Yeah.
And that's what's really important, because, you know, when we get older, being aware, and people do start dying off around us, or our parents die or whatever, it really highlights the fact that we're here now and we need to be having the best possible life that we can possibly have. In my book, that includes preparing for a good death. And once that preparation is done, then we can get on with just living.
Isn't that funny though? I mean, it is really interesting that, from the minute that we're born, we face death. I mean, it can happen to us at any single second of our life. But there's something about being 20, 30, 40, even 50, that you just don't think about it much. It's like, even though it could happen at the same, time, any day. But when you get older, I think you're right. You want to be doing in your life the things that make you happy, that you've always dreamt of doing, all those finished, that bucket list thing.
Yeah.
And, somehow, yes, you start to feel more aware. And so this is why it's important. So in terms of the good death, that from the other perspective, from the people, I was telling you earlier, I interviewed a woman, Pam Kruger, who's a financial advisor. Mm-hmm. And she was saying about legacy, that a good death might be where we have, something to leave for our children or our grandchildren. And often, I know a lot of women in our community are just not there. They just haven't got it. She said that one of the greatest gifts is what you just described, to have a good death, be ready, give them the tools to not stress while they're grieving.
Absolutely. And if that includes particular things that you want to leave behind to people, and to consider that, have considered that beforehand, it's incredibly precious to have received something from somebody, even if you knew you were getting it, but that you knew that they particularly wanted you to have it. That's really important. And that doesn't have to be a thing, by the way. It could be a memory, but it would need to be written down or recorded or spoken about in some way or another. And that's where the preparation comes in. And actually, I call that your living legacy, because you're creating your legacy while you're alive, even though it's going to be used after your death. So very important. It's a very important part of an end-of-life plan, actually.
I think that's a very, very good part. An end-of-life plan is a very important part of a good death, in my opinion. Yeah. And maybe that's why. Is that why you? I mean, tell us a bit about why you started this organization and what motivated you. Presumably desire for a good death for your husband. And I know that's your story.
Well, except that I didn't think about any of this, except that as my husband was in the last few months of his life, we received an email from a friend who said, you must get all these questions answered before he dies. And they were really practical things, like everything that we cover in the end of life plan. And he did manage to answer them. And I discovered afterwards how very helpful that had been. And when I wrote about it in my first book, Gifted by Grief, quite a lot of readers said to me, I really need to answer these questions for myself as well. My family need to know about these answers after I have died. And that's how Before I Go Solutions started. And that's how my new book came about. So I've got a lot to thank Philip for.
Yeah, and you gave them the tools then, based on your own hard experience. That must have been really hard, though. Or was it easier to sit down with him and actually have a list of questions and say, okay, darling, today I need you to answer these 5 questions?
Well, I'll tell you what was hard. What was hard about it was thinking about doing it. That was the hardest part. Actually doing it with Philip turned out to be really lovely. It was a really beautiful morning. We felt incredibly close and connected and warm and loving at the end of it, even though we'd been talking about his death. And that feeling lasted for a long, long time. And it was completely unexpected as well. And actually, other people have told me that as well, that when they do pluck up the courage and they have the conversations or ask the questions or whatever it is with their nearest and dearest, that actually some people have even described it as being fun and enjoyable. I mean, hard to believe, but it does happen.
Well, it involves an intimacy that if you don't have that in your relationship with a partner or a friend, doesn't have to be a partner. It could be a good friend who's alone and you're going through it with them, or it could be a child. It could be, there's so many different ways, but it just allows you to be so intimate and that feels so precious to me.
It is.
Yeah,
it's very precious and it is intimate, and you're having to be honest with each other. And you again, the emphasis may be on death, but the actual experience of it is about being very full of life, which is wonderful, absolutely wonderful.
Yeah, I think that's why death by accidents and that type of thing is so incredibly difficult.
Yeah, it is, because you haven't had time to do any of that. And one of the things that Philip and I were grateful for was that we had this time. And even though we would have not have chosen it like this, we did have that time. But again, that's all the more reason for having these conversations now, because we never know what's going to happen to us.
Absolutely. Well, I don't know if you know this, I think I mentioned it to you, that I used to work with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross.
Yeah.
I helped her with her workshop. So this is, well, 30 years ago, 30 some years ago. And she, in fact, said to me that if I had a choice, I would choose a disease to die from where I had time. And as it was a blessing for her that she did have that gift. She got ended that way. But in some ways, like you say, it gives you time. But we never know. So do it now. I mean, that's the message.
I know.
So
very important.
Yeah, very important. You know, this is a great conversation. I'd like to ask the people that are watching a question. I really, this whole concept of a good death to me is really fascinating. And I'd love to ask you in the comment section below, if you're watching this on YouTube or on our website, to just put a comment in the section below about what you would consider a good death for yourself, and I guess for your friends, family, and close context. Well, how would you ask that question, Jane?
Yeah, I would really love to know that, because the more research about this that is done, and the more that we're willing to talk about it, the better. So yeah, I'd like to know what would you consider to be the components of a good death? How is a good death made up? And to hear the words that you use and the experiences that you think are really important. That would be very, very interesting to read.
Yeah. Well, you know, one thing I love about 60andMe, about our organization, is that we actually are here for each other. We're kind of on this journey together, right? And this is, if you're alone or you're feeling concerned about, you know, what to do. I mean, if you live apart from your children, for example, they may be in other cities or countries. Let's have a conversation about this. Let's see if we can help each other. And Jane is here. She's got a wonderful website called beforeigosolutions.com. And we've talked about this, Jane, that people should feel free to reach out to you. Your organization is not for profit. And I mean, I'm sure you do charge for your services, but it's a not for profit. So you can feel it's a good organization to work with. Jane's in the United Kingdom. So it's just going to give you some guidance wherever you are in the world. And I guess that's my last thought, is just to, you know, let's be in this together. Let's help each other.
Yeah, fantastic. I'm definitely up for that.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Jane, for being here and for your time and your expertise and sharing so much for us.
Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Bye. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our 60andMe YouTube channel and also visit our website. We are a strong and dynamic community of women over 60. We're challenging aging stereotypes, and every day we share fascinating stories, interesting questions, and great conversation.